In the spring of 1917, the British Army decided to try something new. They launched one of their biggest, most ambitious attacks of the whole First World War, the Battle of Arras. This was supposed to be different, a smart, powerful punch designed to finally break the horrifying stalemate of the Western Front. So let's get into this story of brilliant plans and, well, some pretty bitter realities.
I mean, just look at this quote. When the battles started, the results were absolutely mind-blowing. For just a moment, it really seemed like the war of mud and trenches was over, and the war of movement was back. But how did they pull it off? And, the big question is, why couldn't they keep that momentum going?
All right, to really get why Arras was such a big deal, you have to picture what early 1917 was like. For years now, the Western Front had just been a symbol of absolute futility. It was this brutal, static line of trenches where any progress was measured in feet, not miles, and paid for with an unbelievable number of lives. Something, anything, had to change. Just try to imagine it. A scar across Europe, hundreds of miles long, made of mud, barbed wire, and death. Battles like the Somme and Verdun had led to millions of casualties for basically nothing. So you can bet the political pressure back home in London and Paris was absolutely immense. They needed a win, a real one, and they needed it now. And this really gets to the core of it all. It was a huge strategic gamble. On one side, you've got the Allies, who are basically betting everything on one massive knockout punch to just shatter the German lines. But on the other side, the Germans were thinking differently. They were developing a new, way more clever strategy, a flexible defense designed not to stop the punch, but to absorb it and just bleed the attacker white. It was brute force versus a kind of calculated, deadly resilience. The British had learned a very hard lesson at the Somme. They knew that courage and just throwing more men at the problem wasn't going to cut it. Sending guys over the top into a wall of machine gun fire was just suicide. So for Arras, they knew they needed to be smarter. And what they came up with was one of the most detailed and, frankly, genius plans of the entire war. And it all started from the ground down. This part is just incredible. The British found this huge network of ancient tunnels and caves right underneath the German front lines. And they thought, why don't we turn this into a secret underground city, a hidden launch pad for the entire attack? And the scale of this whole thing was just staggering. We were talking about hiding nearly 25,000 men underground. And it wasn't some dingy cave either. They had electric lights, running water, even a fully functioning hospital. Tunnelers from New Zealand dug miles of new subways to get these troops right up to the German wire, totally hidden from view. It was an absolute masterpiece of military engineering. But it wasn't just about hiding. The British completely rewrote the book on infantry tactics. Gone were the days of just walking in a straight line towards the enemy. The new platoon was like a little self-contained team of specialists. You had your grenadiers, your Lewis gunners, your riflemen, all working together to move, suppress enemy fire, and attack German positions on their own. It gave them a flexibility on the battlefield they had never had before. And then, of course, there was the hammer, the artillery. In the week before the attack, British guns fired almost 2.7 million shells. That's over 1 million more than they fired at the Somme. The idea was to just pulverize the German defenses, the barbed wire, everything, before a single British soldier even climbed out of his trench. So you've got this amazing plan, these brand new tactics, and the biggest artillery bombardment in history. Everything was ready. And on April 9th, 1917, the whistle blew. This quote from Germany's top general, Ludendorff, pretty much says it all. He was actually celebrating his birthday when he got the news from Arras, and yeah, it completely ruined his party. The Germans had no idea what was about to hit them. The attack kicked off at 5:30 in the morning, right in the middle of a blinding snow and sleet storm. And that awful weather, it actually helped the British, hiding their advance. The German soldiers, who'd been getting pounded by shells for a week, were caught completely off guard. Many were captured in their shelters. Some didn't even have their boots on. The new tactics were working like a charm. The speed of that initial advance was just breathtaking. In a few days, they'd pushed forward miles, which was completely unheard of in this war. And the Canadian Corps pulled off one of the great feats of the war by capturing Vimy Ridge, this massive, heavily defended hill that everyone thought was impossible to take. It really looked like the breakthrough was finally happening. But, and you knew there was a but coming, the battle was about to take a very dark turn. The Germans were stunned, but they were also masters of bouncing back, and they responded with brutal, cold efficiency. Ludendorff did not mess around. He fired the local commanders and immediately brought in his best defensive specialist, a guy named Colonel von Lossberg. They called him the fireman of the Western Front because he was the expert you called when everything was going wrong. He showed up and immediately started putting Germany's new defensive doctrine into action. So what was this defense in depth? Well, think of it like a giant spring-loaded trap. Instead of one hard front line, the Germans created this deep, elastic defense. They'd actually let the British advance, let them get tired and stretch out their supply lines. And then, just when the attack was losing steam, boom, fresh, powerful German divisions held way back in reserve would slam into their sides. It was a deadly methodical system designed to turn an attacker's success into a death trap. And it worked. The incredible lightning advance of those first few days just stopped. It turned into a horrific, slow-motion slugfest over tiny villages and shattered forests. Places with names like Monchy-le-Preux and Bullecourt became absolute killing grounds. The battle had turned right back into the brutal stalemate it was supposed to break. So, by the time the battle officially sputtered out in the middle of May, the front line had moved, yeah, but the bigger picture really hadn't. Now it was time to count the cost. The numbers are just sickening. The British Empire lost nearly 160,000 men. The Germans, about 125,000. For all that innovation, all that initial success, Arras just became another meat grinder. In fact, the average number of British casualties per day was actually higher than it was at the Somme. So what's the final verdict on Arras? It's complicated. On one hand, it was a tactical victory. The British showed they could pull off these incredibly complex attacks. The capture of Vimy Ridge was a truly stunning achievement. But the whole point, the big prize, the strategic breakthrough that was supposed to win the war, it just remained a bloody illusion. And we'll end with this pretty haunting quote from the German commander himself. Even the enemy was left scratching his head, wondering what the whole point of this immense slaughter really was. The Battle of Arras is just this powerful, tragic example of tactical genius and strategic failure. A battle that promised a whole new way to fight the war, but in the end, just delivered more of the same.